Welcome back to another Sunday School Bible class. This week's lesson is entitled, The First 9 Plagues God Sends on Egypt. We have seen how God called Moses as the one he would use to free the Hebrews from slavery in Egypt and bring them to the Promised Land. Moses then went to Egypt with his older brother Aaron as commanded by God. When Moses told Pharaoh that God commanded that he let the Hebrews go, Pharaoh got angry and made things worse for the Hebrews. When God told Moses to go back to Pharaoh and show him a sample of God's power by turning Aaron's rod into a snake, Pharaoh had his magicians do the very same thing. However, Moses' serpent swallowed up the magician's serpent, but Pharaoh hardened his heart and he refused to let the Hebrews go. In this week's lesson, we will see how God demonstrated his power to all in Egypt, both Egyptian and Hebrew. The first plague God sent was on the Nile River. The Nile River was important to the Egyptians because it provided food and water for the Egyptians and their animals and crops. God told Moses to meet Pharaoh by the river and tell him because he would not obey God, God would show him that he is the Lord and that he will strike the river and turn it to blood. And this will cause all the fish in the river to die and the river will stink. Therefore, God told Moses to tell Aaron to take his rod and stretch it out over the waters of Egypt, and as he did, the waters all turned to blood. No one could drink of the waters throughout the land of Egypt, and the waters stank because all the fish died. Because the magicians were able to do the same thing, Pharaoh hardened his heart and would not let the Hebrews go. Yet for 7 days there was blood in all the bodies of water that Aaron's rod touched. We are not told in the Bible how long God waited between each plague before he sent the next one. It could have been a few days, a few weeks, or a few months between each plague. Before each plague, in order to prove that this was not just a freak of nature, God would send Moses to Pharaoh, give him a chance to repent, and if he still refused to acknowledge and obey God, he foretold exactly when the next plague would start and when it would stop. After the plague of blood, Moses told Pharaoh that of thousands of frogs that were going to come up out of the river and infest the land of Egypt. As instructed by God, Aaron took his rod and touched the river, and thousands of frogs came up out of the river and infested the land, going into the homes, kitchens, and even in the bedrooms of the Egyptians. When Pharaoh called for the magicians, although they could do the same thing with their enchantments, they could not get rid of the frogs. Therefore, Pharaoh told Moses he would let the Hebrews go. Moses told Pharaoh exactly when the frogs would cease, and it happened just as he said it would. When Pharaoh saw there were no more frogs, he went back on his word and did not let the Hebrews go. Therefore, God told Moses to tell Aaron to stretch out his rod upon the dust, and it brought forth lice, these tiny little bugs, throughout all the land of Egypt, so that there were lice upon man and beast. The magicians could not do this with their enchantments. Therefore, they told Pharaoh that this was the hand of God. But Pharaoh refused to let the Hebrews go. Then God told Moses to meet Pharaoh at the river and tell him that there were going to be swarms of flies upon the land of Egypt, but not on the land of Goshen, where the Hebrews lived. Sure enough, swarms of flies came upon all the land of Egypt, but not on the land of Goshen, where the Hebrews lived. Pharaoh therefore called for Moses and told him he would let the Hebrews go, and Moses entreated God, and the flies left. But Pharaoh hardened his heart again. The next plague God sent upon all the domesticated animals of Egypt, so that many of them died. Because Pharaoh still would not yield, God sent a plague of sores upon all the Egyptians. God warned Pharaoh through Moses again that if he did not obey, God would send another plague, more plagues. Then God sent the plague of hail. Hail is when ice drops fall from the sky like rain or snow. The hailstorm that God sent was so severe that the Egyptians had never seen hail like this before. The hailstones were so large that they would kill anyone who was outside. The hail also destroyed some of the crops on the farms. With this hail, in addition to the thunder and lightning, there was also fire along the ground. Many of the crops were destroyed by the hail. Yet the land of Goshen had no hail. Then God sent a plague of locusts, which are like giant grasshoppers or big grasshoppers. There were millions of these things. The land of Egypt had never seen swarms of locusts like this before. The locusts went into the houses and fields and ate all the rest of the crops on their farms. Now Egypt had no food. Again, the land of Goshen had no locusts. Then when Pharaoh refused to let the Hebrews go, God sent another plague of darkness, so thick that it could be felt, and not even the moon or the stars could be seen. This lasted 3 days, so that the Egyptians had to stay put in their houses. Yet the land of Goshen had light. Millions of people saw these plagues, both Hebrews and Egyptians. God was making a great name for himself to show all the nations how powerful he was. In our next lesson, we're going to see that because Pharaoh, in spite of all the warnings and proofs that God showed him, still would not repent, God would send the worst and last plague upon the land of Egypt. This plague was so bad that not even Pharaoh dared disobey God any longer. This event would be remembered and recounted even today, over 3,000 years later, by a special meal God instituted known as Passover. This would be referred to throughout the rest of the entire Bible and even observed by Jesus Christ in a very special way. Please do not miss these next few lessons. See you next time. Bye-bye.